Warm welcome to today's talk, Monday the 22nd of January. Now, last night the British Heart Foundation in the United Kingdom issued a press release about the, well, I would say alarming increase in cardiovascular deaths and heart deaths. I'm going to cover that in some detail shortly, but before we do that, we have to note that excess deaths are an international problem. This is not just the United Kingdom. Let's just have a look at some information from Our World in Data here. Now, here we see the United States, excess mortality, deaths from all causes in the United States. And we see it's been, well, it's just gone above the 10% mark, hasn't it? It's been 10 to 20% here. And what, 8% there now, about what, 11% in the United States. So, excess deaths for a long time now in the United States, sadly. Moving on to Canada, and we see that the situation in Canada, well, for the last few months, the excess deaths have been round about the 15% mark, somewhat over the 15% mark. More deaths than we would expect based on 5-year averages. Really quite significant. Looking at Australia now, this is the graphic for Australia. Now, let's hope this is accurate from Australia, that it has gone down. But I suspect there could have been delays in data from Australia because, as you see, it has been very high. It's been around about the 20% mark. Really quite high excess deaths in Australia. We'll keep an eye on that, see if that is genuine. Let's hope it is, that the excess deaths in Australia are back down to a kind of a baseline. This is Ireland. And again, in Ireland, we've been between the 10 and 20% mark, around about 8% now, but fairly high, consistently 2021, 2022, 2023. Much higher excess deaths in all of these countries. New Zealand, let's look at New Zealand now. New Zealand, well, again, very similar to Ireland, really, 10 to 20%, peaking up at 30%, down to about 8%. As of the latest data, but 10 to 20% is kind of the range it has been at. Netherlands, it's been, well, similar really, because remember that's the 20% line there for the Netherlands. So Netherlands still reasonably high, above 20% now, in fact, for excess deaths in the Netherlands. Now, I think the last one I put on is Japan, where the excess deaths here are really quite staggering and still rising consistently. So there we see it, well over 20% in Japan, and has been for some time. Very steady linear increase in excess deaths in Japan. Now we see this pattern of global excess deaths, and we're going to keep going on about it till we get some answers on this, because it's just an appalling situation. Governments around the world are simply not answering the questions desired. And we're now going to look at the British Heart Foundation, a press release from overnight. Now, I did get this emailed this directly, and it has been emailed to major news outlets in the UK. It's not available as a reference as yet, but it is what they've sent me. So let's look at that now. That was the graphics for Our World in Data website. Check it out for yourself. Completely brilliant website. Early heart disease deaths rise to 14-year high. So early heart disease deaths rise to 14-year high. Quite alarming in younger demographics as well. Over 100,000 excess deaths involving cardiovascular conditions in England since February 2020. Now, this is 100,000 people that have died of cardiovascular disease that we wouldn't expect to die. And that's just of cardiovascular disease. 100,000. And where is the public outcry about this? Where is the saturation coverage on mainstream media? Questions in Parliament, yes, and a few more MPs did turn up to the last debate, thankfully, but it was still only a Westminster Hall debate, not a full chamber debate. When is the British government going to take this seriously? When is the Japanese government going to take this seriously? The American government, Canadian government, Australian government, Irish government, all the graphics that we've just looked at. Heart and circulatory disease cause around a quarter in all deaths in England, 140,000 deaths each year, or 1 in 4 deaths. So cardiovascular disease, quarter of deaths, but increasing, and increasing in proportion. Healthcare costs relating to heart and circulatory disease, £6.3 billion each year. Cost to the wider economy of cardiovascular disease, including premature death, disability, and informal costs, 22 billion each year. I mean, this isn't even good economics. This is costing countries a fortune because people that would be productive are dying, apart from the incalculable tragedy to the individual and the family. It makes good economic sense. If governments aren't motivated by sheer love of their people, you'd think they'd be motivated by hard cash, because this is costing us a fortune. And yet we see essentially nothing from governments. Quite disappointing, really. Latest NHS England, this is just England, of course, figures show that the number of people waiting for cardiac care at the end of November, so much more cardiac pathology, 402,000 people waiting for care. The heart care waiting list is 72% higher than in February, so more people with heart conditions waiting for conditions. Huge amount. Basically, we've got an epidemic of heart disease. I don't think that's overstating the situation. We've got an epidemic of heart disease here. This is an increase of 169,000 people, enough to fill this huge sporting stadium in the UK nearly twice over. In 2022, over 39,000 people in England died prematurely of cardiovascular conditions. This is just in 2022. 39,000 deaths just from cardiovascular conditions. That's heart attacks, coronary heart disease, disease of the coronary arteries, and stroke, these cerebrovascular accidents affecting the brain. And apart from, I haven't got the figures in front of me, but there's a huge increase in the UK, well over 60%, I think it is, in I think it's called PIP, personally injury payment or something. Anyway, it's disability allowances and things. It's gone up hugely in the UK because stroke, of course, can cause permanent disability. One side of the body can be paralysed, the speech can be affected. Lives are changed with paralysis, ongoing. And after a particular window of time, it doesn't get better. You can get some improvements initially, but once it's an established stroke, that's it. Pretty well. You can get some remodelling, but it's the pathology doesn't really improve. That's an average of 750 people a week. It's the highest annual total since 2008. So highest since 2008. Since 2020, the premature death rate for cardiovascular disease has risen year on year. So 2021 was higher, 22 was higher, 2023 was higher. 2024, of course, we don't yet know. This is the first time there's been a clear reversal in the trends for almost 60 years. When I was a young staff nurse, I worked on coronary care. We used to get people in with terrible coronaries all the time. It was a routine thing in that time, just before we had antithrombolysis, just as thrombolysis was being invented, the dissolving of the clots. Thankfully, it had gone down and down and down and down. But now that trend is reversing. It's really quite tragic to see this severe pathology coming back again when it had been so much better. British Heart Foundation says more analysis is needed to understand what is driving the trend. We certainly agree. Now, they do talk about difficulties in treatment, which are, of course, immense, and we agree with that, but are there other factors? The cardiologist, Dr. Sonia, one of the senior people, British Heart Foundations, we're still seeing more people than expected die from cardiovascular conditions overall, more than any other disease group. It's clear to me that urgent intervention is long overdue. Now, in January 2023, the government announced a major conditions strategy. Major conditions strategy to tackle the biggest drivers of ill health and early deaths in the UK. Now, this doesn't report till probably autumn, maybe. It could be summer, but probably not till autumn. Interesting to see what they come up with. They are talking about strategies rather than working out what the heck is causing this. We need to work out what is causing this so we can take away the causes. Some causes are known, diabetes, for example, hypertension, for example. But we do not too bad a job of managing those, and I'm not sure the management of those is too much worse than it was. It's never, of course, where we'd like it to be. So what other factor or factors are at play here. Let me know what you think. Now let's just go on and look at some more figures here. This is deaths from ischemic heart disease. So the light blue increases, the dark blue is less than we would expect. So we see that we've got these light blue higher numbers than we would expect. Now, ischemic heart disease is basically disease of the coronary arteries. Ischemia means an inadequate blood supply to a tissue. So there can be a reduced blood supply due to inflammation and atheroma, fatty plaques developing in the coronary arteries. But has there been any factors that could accelerate the growth of these atherosclerotic plaques in the last few years is an interesting question. Because if there's more coronary artery disease, presumably there's more coronary artery atherosclerosis, the actual disease process. And of course, when I was young, smoking was a huge factor in this, huge factor. And very few people smoke now compared to what used to smoke. So I don't really believe that's a big factor anymore. But again, why should that have got dramatically bigger in the last few years? So that's ischemic heart disease. This one is cerebrovascular disease, so strokes and things. And again, we see that the numbers are consistently week on week above where we would expect it to be, with only the very occasional week where they drop below. This one is other circulatory diseases, unspecified, but again, we see there's generally an increase. And this is the final one I'm going to show you, the heart failure. Now, I think most of us know that the heart requires the myocardium to pump out the blood, to generate the blood pressure, to generate the cardiac output. You need a contractile myocardium. You also need functional valves to make sure there's a one-way flow of blood. Now, in heart failure, the heart is unable to generate sufficient cardiac output to meet the metabolic demands of the body. It's not able to pump enough blood around the circulatory system. So in essence, this is pump failure. It can be valve failure, but very often, and I believe the latest trend is primarily driven by myocardial insufficiency. Myocardiums around the country, heart muscle around the country, is simply not doing the job it's supposed to do, causing this huge increase in heart failure. Very often the person becomes very unfit. They get short of breath, even short of breath when they're resting. Very often they can be short of breath when they lie down at night. Quite distressing feature. I've seen people with this, with severe pulmonary edema, coughing up pink, frothy sputum. And this is what we've got more of at the moment. Quite an unpleasant, well, very unpleasant, terrible disease process. And there's a lot more of it. The question is why? So that's all I wanted to say, really. Excess deaths around the world, definitely and ongoing. Large percentages, large numbers of human lives being lost. Pretty well no official interest in the cause of this. Why would governments not want to get to the bottom of this? Why aren't universities being given emergency grants to investigate this? Because we've got the pathologists, we've got the medical researchers, we've got the statisticians, but we might as well not have, because they're not being adequately commissioned to do this work. It's the heart disease is really particularly concerning, actually. Now, I don't know what proportion of those excess deaths are caused by heart disease in other countries, but I would assume in most of the countries we looked at, it could well be the largest single factor, as it is in the United Kingdom. So maybe like me, you feel let down, deserted. You're not isolated. There's lots of us. I think that's why people probably watch these videos. But we have been greatly let down, as far as I can see, on many, many levels. Many, many levels. That's us for today. Just want to show you something that's a mild piece of amusement from Russell Brand. Thank you, Russell. Who would you trust to lead the response? Disease X is imminent. The serious part here is that people in the World Economic Forum and WHO are telling us disease X is imminent. I do hope they don't know something we don't. I really hope they don't. They're talking about this disease being 20 times more deadly than SARS coronavirus 2. I wonder why they didn't say 19 times more deadly or 21 times more deadly. 20 seems a fairly precise figure. Let's hope they're wrong about that. And let's hope they're sharing all the information that they have with us. And of course, let's hope they're sharing all the information they have with us. Anyway, who would you trust to lead the next response? This guy's called Klaus Schwab, Albert Bourla, Bill Gates. I'm not sure I've heard of these, and me. So I get slightly more votes, 94%. I hasten to add this is a joke. Russell Brand is a comedian, but I think it's quite funny. And I'm going to share something that's utterly bizarre. A strange hack lecturer from Carlisle has just got to 3 million subscribers. So thank you. It's just I'm bemused, really bemused. But thank you for that. And we'll keep going while we can, and we'll keep asking questions. We'll say whatever we can. It's a pity we don't have much greater freedom to speak openly. But this is a lot better than nothing. So thank you, and thank you for watching this video.